Hello everyone and welcome to our 2050 Calculator event and welcome to the UK Pavilion. It's the last day of COP, but there's still loads of exciting things happening here today, as you can tell, and I'm really excited about this event because this is about really tangible work that we can all do together, collaborating to help countries on their transition, whether it's the UK or whether it's Nigeria, globally. So it is a fantastic tool that we have here today that we want to share with you and let you know a little bit more about. So hi everyone, and I'm Kate Hughes. I've come up on the slide, how exciting is that? I'm Director for International Climate Change in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in the UK Government. And we've got a fantastic panel here for you today. So let me just briefly introduce them and we'll hear more from them later. They're going to take you through some of the 2050 Calculator in sort of real life. So we've got Sam Friggins, who is Global Practice Leader for Climate Change at Mott MacDonald, and they're our lead delivery partner for the ICF-funded International 2050 Calculator Programme. We have Iniobong Abiola Awe, Deputy Director at the Department of Climate Change, the Federal Ministry of Environment Nigeria, and she's going to speak a bit about the Nigerian experience and using the calculator there. Dr. Onesmus Mwambonje, have I got that right? Mwambonje. Excellent. Research Fellow at Imperial College in London, who's one of our technical experts and is providing that capacity into building the calculated teams, and Professor Rebekah Willis, who's Professor in Climate and Energy Governance at the University of Lancaster, who uses the UK calculator in her teaching and practice and is wearing the most beautiful dress today as well. I was wearing a very similar dress yesterday, so we're very pleased. We've coordinated and we're not wearing the same. So thank you for joining us. Great to have this panel here today. Policymakers, technical experts, so we can hear some really diverse perspectives on the calculator. And I just wanted, so a quick mention here too, on Saturday, this is a bit of the technical bit of the COPs and how they work. I was giving the UK's multilateral assessment process, so I was being grilled about what the UK does domestically to meet our net zero targets. Full of a room of people from all of the kind of the parties who are here at the COP, and you can be asked absolutely anything about the UK's experience. And we got a question about the 2050 calculator, and just to hear a bit more about it from someone, another country who was saying, isn't this exciting? We'd love what you're doing with the 2050 calculator. Does it underpin your modelling? And, can other people use it? To which the answer was absolutely. And that's why we're here today, to hear a bit more about it. So let me say a little bit about what we're doing and why it is important. I mean, I can probably skip this bit. You're all here at COP because you know how important this is and how the urgency of action that we all need to take across all of our sectors to make progress. And we've been meeting at COPs for a long time, and the point is we're bringing together every country to make global progress. And this year, we've heard lots of amazing commitments over the last 2 weeks as well. We've heard about real-world impacts that are happening, but we know we need to track those. And we know we need to do more. We know we need to take further progress and turn those commitments into action as well if we're going to keep to 1.5 degrees. And that means collaboration, and that means working with all countries. And all of those countries need those detailed plans and strategies. And we know that you need to be able to understand your current emissions if you're going to make those plans to reduce your emissions. Where are they coming from, and what are the trade-offs, and what can you do in different places? So we don't just need empty promises, we need real commitments. So, I've lost my page. There we go. I think this is it. We'll soon find out. So, seamless, isn't it? So these tools will play a really critical role in enabling countries to set and plan for their ambitious climate targets, just as the UK is doing as well. And I'm going to say a little bit more about the UK as of experience in a moment as well. So looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to pause now for just a bit of a video that we'll put together by our delivery partners, Mott MacDonald, which showcases some of the work that is going on. Well, thank you to Mott MacDonald for actually pulling that together. I think that gives us a really kind of useful insight into this as a really practical tool that can be used by all kinds of people, you know, whether it's our ministers making those decisions all the way down to actually a kind of an educational tool as well for school children to understand the impacts of different choices and what that looks like. So thank you. So let me spend just a couple of minutes talking about the UK experience, because that, you know, that's kind of where it started, and as you saw in the film, you know, really, really integral to some of our decision making on our policies and our targets as well. So the origins of the 2050 calculator go back to 2008, when we signed our Climate Change Act into law. So then the UK became the first country in the world to have a legally binding emission reduction commitment of 80%. Do you remember those days of 80%? So emission reductions by 2050. And of course, the question is, well, how do you actually meet that target? We really wanted to understand and be clear that when we were making those commitments, we were able to deliver on them. And the first calculator was built in 2010 to help us answer those questions. And the calculator, as you've seen, allows experts and non-experts alike to develop their own combination of policies in different technologies and sectors to explore different energy and emission scenarios all the way out to 2050. And the tool can be used by businesses, NGOs, governments to show how changes in lifestyles, food consumption, technology choices, fuel, land use, all of those sectors can impact on emissions and climate change. Stakeholder engagement was really central to the design of the UK calculator, because the whole point of this tool is that it's supposed to provide that common language for diverse stakeholders, to bring them out of their silos, bring them together, to enable them to have this conversation all together about our future and to be able to interact on that and connect. So that's why we consulted with industry, academia, NGOs, and different government departments when creating that original calculator. And it was used to develop pathways for the carbon plan in 2011, the UK strategy back then to reduce emissions. And we set out 4 different ways of meeting our 2050 target and looked across them to identify the big changes that had to take place. And since then, that's inspired policies. We developed a heat strategy. As the calculator showed, we would need to overhaul the way we heat our homes and businesses. It was really clear that we couldn't achieve our targets without tackling that. And we made changes to the electricity market, including a new auction mechanism for low-carbon power generation called Contracts for Difference. And this helps project developers by giving them a guaranteed price for their electricity. We did an updated UK version, was published on the 3rd of December 2020, so just last year, with all kinds of options as well for what can be done, and now, updating so for our net zero targets too. So let me hand over to Sam here, who's going to walk you through the model.
Thank you very much, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam from Mott MacDonald. Mott MacDonald is an engineering, development and management consultancy, and we lead the consortium that is delivering the UK government's 2050 International Carbon Calculator programme. And that programme involves working with a number of countries around the world to develop their own calculators to use to increase climate ambition. So what I want to do is just to give you a quick demonstration of the current UK calculator. So this is called the Mackay Carbon Calculator, and it's available online. So I'd urge all of you, if you Google UK Mackay 2050 calculator, you can find this. And it's a really great tool, so I'd encourage you all to go and to try it out for yourself and to see what this tool can do. So when you first open the Mackay calculator, this is what you see. The top graph in the middle looks at total UK greenhouse gas emissions starting from 2015, projected through to 2050. And actually, the Mackay calculator now has an option to extend that to 2100 as well. And those emissions are broken down by different sectors of the economy. And you can see the yellow there is the electricity generation sector. The graph at the bottom shows primary energy consumption in the UK, again from 2015, projected all the way through to 2050, and that's broken down by energy source, and you can see in light grey, you've got natural gas. If you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a gauge which says minus 35%. So what that does is that indicates the percentage reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 2050 versus a 1990 baseline. So it's a really important point to make here is that when you first open the model, it is at the least level of ambition that the model can go to. So when you first open it, it does not meet the UK's net zero target, and it does not reflect the UK's current level of policy ambition. Then on the left-hand side, you can see that list of items. These are what we call levers, and those levers are aggregated under 6 key headings, so transport, electricity, greenhouse gas removal, so 6 sectors of the economy. And under each of those are the levers. And each lever has 4 levels of ambition that you can choose as the model user. So level 1 is very little ambition, the least ambition. Level 2 is ambitious but considered reasonable. Level 3 is very ambitious but, achievable with effort. And level 4 is considered the maximum technical potential for that particular lever. So I'm going to try and show you what happens if we start to play with the model now. So let's say as the model user, I want to see what happens if we were to increase the deployment of electric vehicles in the UK through to 2050. So if you can imagine I'm online and I take my cursor and I go to the transport heading on the left-hand side, and I click on that, and you can see that now reveals a number of those transport levers. So the one I want to look at now is the light vehicles electric one. So that's the 3rd or 4th lever down. And again, if I hover my cursor over level 3 ambition, the writing might be a bit small there, but it shows you what the assumption is. So that's a 95% deployment of electric vehicles in the UK by 2050 under level 3. So I'm going to click that now and see what impact that has on the outputs of the model. So a number of things have happened there. First of all, the emissions reduction by 2050 has now fallen to 41% below 1990 levels, so they're reduced. And in terms of the primary energy consumption, as you'd expect, the amount of oil in the economy is reduced, but actually, in this scenario, the amount of natural gas is increased. And that's because the model, at its lowest level of ambition, assumes that the extra power demand for electric vehicles is met through natural gas, which the UK currently uses a lot of. But let's now say I want to see what happens if I also increase ambition in terms of renewable energy deployment. So what I'm going to do now is choose under the electricity lever, I'm going to choose a higher level of ambition on wind energy. So I'm going to select the third level of ambition on that lever. So I'll click that now. There you go. So a number of things have happened now. So this now assumes that the UK has deployed over 150 gigawatts of on and offshore wind by 2050. So that is a big, big increase on where we are today. If you look at the emissions gauge, that's now gone down to 59% below 1990 levels, so substantial reduction. And you can also see that wind as a percentage of the primary energy consumption is really quite substantial now on that bottom graph, as you can see in green. So what this tells you as the model user is that if in the UK we combine these two things, electric vehicle rollout with high levels of renewable ambition, that really makes a substantial impact on our overall greenhouse gas emissions. But that's not always the case. So if we were to take another lever, let's take the lever for wave and tidal energy and click the highest level of ambition on that. So I'll do that now. And that's actually made a pretty small impact overall. So emissions now are 60% below 1990 levels. So this is not a reason to not invest in wave and tidal, but it's simply a reason to be realistic about what these different options can achieve in terms of overall emissions reduction. So we're currently at 60%. We're still a long way from our net zero target. So the model has a default illustrative net zero pathway that's already baked in. So I'll show you that now. So this is a pathway, and you can see on the left-hand side with the levers that many of the levers are now at level 2 or 3 of ambition. And this is actually a high nuclear scenario. But you as the user can go in and you can create your own net zero scenarios. Behind each of those levers that I've just showed you, and this is a really important point that I wanted to make, behind each of the levers lies data and assumptions. So each lever is underpinned by a one-page information sheet that is the product of a collaborative process that brings together government and other stakeholders to come together to define those levels of ambition and to work out the assumptions behind them. And then I just wanted to leave you with a quote from the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Kwasi Kwarteng. And he says that the calculator gives us a common framework. It's a common language to describe our shared vision. And he encourages all of you and all of us to go and try using this tool. Thank you. And so I'll pass over to Iniobong.
Thank you very much, Sam and Kate. And thank you, organizers of this event, for giving Nigeria an opportunity to express what has already been going on with us on the 2050 calculator. You mentioned me as Deputy Director. I've gone up the ladder, the value chain ladder. I got that good news here at the COP. So my value of influence in policy and decision-making would increase. Thank you very much. The first Nigerian calculator was developed in 2015 and used for Nigeria's first nationally determined contribution. We're all aware of Nigerians' ambitious commitment to this, and we've used it to identify low emission pathway to meet energy demands supply between 2010 and looking ahead for 2050. It might just be 2060 now, especially as our president has mentioned that. We'll also be looking at, it was also used to improve our energy policy assessments, formulation, and planning. Next slide, please. But the new calculator, which is being developed and completed, set to be launched, has a climate flavor and has a climate reasoning to it. Nigeria went into an MOU with the UK government. It was signed in June 2020. You see the picture up there with the Director General and the focal points in the energy sector. I work as the focal person in the Ministry of Environment. So the two organizations working on developing the second calculator project is the Federal Ministry of Environment, for which I represent, and the Energy Commission of Nigeria. Following that signing, we went straight into initiating the different programs for developing the calculator. This new version of calculator has a baseline of 2015 and reflects new policies introduced in Nigeria. It seeks to remove the coal power plants from the former model, and would also see more detailed sectors included in this to give it that climate reasoning. They are full sector modeling. What can we do with this? I'd rather see what we're doing with this and what this is expected to achieve. 50% of our population do not have access to electricity. This would inform decisions on the electricity sector. About 80% of the grid electricity supply is from gas power, and we're moving into the direction of the net zero emission and the energy transition, where we see our gas sector having a whole lot of improvements. This calculator will seek to support that process. The energy sector and their follow accounts for 60% and 25% of the total greenhouse gas emission. This calculator would demonstrate those values for us in a transparent manner. At the last approved Executive National Energy Policy, which was done in 2050, this calculator will seek to improve the content of that policy and see how we can update this for the future. And there's need for us to have a comprehensive, all-inclusive energy policy which captures the importance of reducing the effects of climate change and reducing emission. This calculator will seek to do that for us in Nigeria. Next slide, please. The energy policy would capture Nigeria's commitments to emission reductions as a party to the Paris Agreement, as stated in our NDC. This calculator would show a demonstration of this. The calculator model will give Nigeria a lot of insight when it comes to drafting our next energy policy. And I would like to say, in addition, our climate change policy. This new version of calculator would also make it easier for stakeholders to chart a pathway for renewable energy and clean energy technologies to deliver Nigeria's energy needs. And it would further guide the development of the energy transition master plan, for which I already mentioned. Next slide, please. In concluding, I would like to say that the Nigerian Energy Calculator will be a major tool in drafting our next national energy policy and further define a clear pathway for Nigeria's energy transition. It will also be key in increasing our nationally determined contributions and commitments. I'd like to say at this point, our updated nationally determined contribution made an addition of a sector and also an increased percentage of our commitments. This calculator would support a proper monitoring and reporting of our emission reductions within the NDC. Sorry, I'm not through with that. It will also enhance Nigeria's national reportings to the UNFCCC. This is key. So I pause to give a little more light to this. Nigeria, as a party, is obligated to reporting her commitments through the national communications and the biannual update reports, for which Nigeria has submitted her first national communication, the second national communication, the third, and sets to initiate process for the fourth national communication, just in time for us to have a tool that will enable Nigeria reports in a transparent, accurate, consistent manner for which the UNFCCC requires of parties. So this tool will enable Nigeria be efficient in her reporting. Nigeria has also, by this also informed that Nigeria has just completed her first national inventory reports and set to begin the second one. Nigeria will be submitting her fourth national communication with her BTR in a few years' time. And there is no better time to have a tool like the newly developed NECAL tool to support and enhance our reporting in a very efficient and effective way. Ultimately, the NECAL 2050 will help demonstrate and implement Nigeria's commitment towards emission reduction, mitigating the effects of climate change. I'd like to conclude this by expressing Nigeria's appreciation to the UK government for this veritable tool to support our policy making. And with a quote from our Honorable Minister of Environment that says, the Nigerian Calculator 2052 offers an opportunity for policymakers, academia, civil society organizations, and the private sector to engage on enhancing sustainable energy pathway in Nigeria. I hope, as she mentions, that the collaborative efforts between Nigeria and the United Kingdom will continue to yield positive results for the achievement of a climate resilient and a green pathway for national sustainable development. On this note, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of Nigeria. And then I'll share the appreciation with one of our own on this team, who has also supported us in Nigeria in building this calculator as we launch it in a few months' time. Once more, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Onesmus Bonjo. I'm a research fellow at Imperial College London, and as Madam Director has alluded to, I have been supporting the Nigerian team to update their calculator. I'm part of the consortia, which is led by Mott MacDonald, that are supporting and providing this capacity support around the world. My talk this afternoon is to look at the process and the kind of outputs, initial outputs that are coming out of the new model. Next slide, please. In building in updating the new Nigeria calculator, we took an approach based on the theory of change in terms of building communities of practice through stakeholder engagement. These communities were based on the sectorial approach that the core team took in order to build to update the new tool. The theory of change is a specific type of methodology for planning and participation. It defines the long-term goal and maps backwards to identify necessary preconditions in order to meet that long-term goal. The theory of change in this case was used to identify the right levers and levels of ambitions for building up the NECAL, and this was done through stakeholder engagement. Through these engagements as well, they were key in terms of evaluating data and obtaining data, but also testing assumptions that went into the updated model. The figure below depicts the theory of change, starting from goal to impacts, and then doing this backward mapping in order to refine this long-term goal. This approach has not just been applied in Nigeria, but we've also been applying it in other countries such as Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Thailand, that as a consortium, we are supporting the development of their new calculators. Next slide, please. The updated NECAL mirrors the UK Mackey carbon calculator. It's got 6 sectors and 41 levers. Next slide. And here are some of the preliminary results that are coming out of the model. The left-hand side graph depicts the annual greenhouse gas emissions from 2015 up to 2050. And the left-hand graph depicts the final energy consumption also from the same timeline, 2015 to 2050. A lot of work still needs to go into it in terms of quality assurance and checking and testing the assumptions in order to make sure that the outputs coming out of the model are absolute right and based on the direction of travel and the outcomes that are coming out of this scope. Next slide, please. And this shows one of the engagement activities that we had, the team had in Nigeria. As it's already been mentioned, at the heart of these calculators is stakeholder engagement activities. And so this event brought experts from the government, from the academia, and also industry in order to plan and input the right sort of data and parameterize the levels of ambition in the right way. And I would like to end with this slide. Thank you very much, and I hand over to you, Kate.
Gosh, thank you all so much. I mean, it's just brilliant to see it coming to life in that way. And actually, a key theme that we've been talking about through all of these 2 weeks is, the integrity of action. And I think that really comes through, but also, sort of inclusivity as well, and sort of bringing together people to do it. And you can see that underneath that sort of front end and really easy to read, nice graphs is hugely kind of complex data sitting underneath that, which go through a huge kind of due diligence process too, as we've just heard. So we're really excited that the Nigerian calculator is coming together, and that it's already kind of informing, and you plan to use it in the reports that you're doing into the UNFCCC, but also in your policy work as well. So thank you for that. And we're now going to have a bit of a discussion, and I'm going to come to Rebekah, you first, because, we've touched on some of this, but it'd be great to hear from you on kind of your work and how we can use the calculator to really understand the net zero challenge and what that means for communities and people.
Thank you, Kate. I'm really pleased. Thank you so much for inviting me, because I'm a long-time fan of the calculator in its previous version and the new version. So I was also part of the stakeholder process that helped to develop the UK one. So I hope my views are in there somewhere. If you dig down deep enough into the model, I said a lot about demand as well as supply, and the importance of concentrating on that both. Now I teach undergraduates at Lancaster about energy systems, and I use the model to let them have a play around in the introductory lecture, so they get just an idea for what an energy system looks like and the 2050 challenge. And pretty consistent feedback. Firstly, that it's really hard to get to net zero by 2050. There are some who go really gung-ho, put everything up to 4, and then realise, actually, that's pretty unrealistic. And then there are those who play around with it really carefully. Also, I think the way that you manage to see the interaction. So another thing that they report back on is that they whack hydrogen up high, and actually the carbon intensity goes up, unless you also do something about renewables, because obviously hydrogen is only as good as the way you make it. So really, really useful tool there, and I'm already thinking that next time I use it, I want half the class to use the UK version and half to use the Nigeria version, so that they get the idea as well of those different social and economic and natural environment circumstances in those two countries, and so many teachable moments there as well. What I also wanted to say in terms of how it helps us get to the challenge of net zero is just say something about the role to sort of situate something like a calculator tool in that bigger challenge. And this is emphatically not to criticise the calculator, but just to say how it's part of a wider and very complex picture. I think, the first thing I'd say is that, as we all know from prowling the corridors of COP, information and evidence is absolutely necessary, but not sufficient. We are at a stage now in the climate debate where we know very well what the impacts are, and we have the solutions mapped out, as this calculator shows, and yet we're not there yet. Right, and there's another game that there's another sort of it's a game which is also intended at sort of public involvement, which takes a very different approach to the calculator, and I'd recommend that you have a look at this one too. It's called Energetic, and it models the New York energy system, but actually there are also points in it for public involvement. And if you don't score well enough in getting your solutions across to the public, then basically you're voted out. And also for investor confidence. So if you don't have the confidence of your investors, you don't get enough money, you can't build the kit. And so looking at all those sort of political and engagement challenges as well is really vital. And that's sort of how you build on the calculator to look at those challenges. I think also that it's crucial to think of this not just in terms of a sort of a top-down technological challenge, but as a deeply social challenge, which involves listening to people, accepting people's accepting people's lived expertise, and that's why having that stakeholder input into the process is really, really crucial. And you know, I always want to dig into the assumptions behind the levers for demand reduction as well, because I think that the technology options are much better understood than the ones that depend essentially on human views and values and behaviours, because they're really hard to model. So I think those are the things which, you know, and again, with my students, when I've taken them through, when they've had a play at the calculator, I have asked them to do that, you know, to have a think through, situate, you know, the extent to which the calculator is, you know, what the calculator leaves out, if you like, and sort of get them to reflect on the fact that they've just been playing sort of benign dictator with the calculator, and that all those very complex social and economic challenges also underpin it. So, you know, as an engagement tool, it's really, really brilliant, and I've been fascinated to hear today as well about how it can be used for the, you know, much more technical and involved job of developing countries' NDCs. So, yeah, great debate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, you know, what we're hearing about is the different ways in which this can be used and the different levels of engagement and development. And I guess it would just be great, you know, sort of Sam and Nesmus maybe as well, you know, you've been working on this for a while and thinking through various models in the UK, globally, in different countries. You know, what is it that really makes for a successful calculator?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So I'll offer a view and then maybe hand over to Nesmus. And so ultimately, I think the success of a tool like this is in how it's used and whether it ultimately is used either with policymakers and others to increase ambition, or if it's used as a more educational tool in order to kind of get that engagement and understanding going. So it's in how it's used. With the current international programme, a lot of the calculators that are being developed are not yet finished. It's very much in the process. So it's perhaps a bit early to kind of judge that final success of those calculators. But we do know that countries want to use them for their NDCs, for their long-term planning, for their energy strategies. So I think that's looking really important. But at the level below that, I think there are some really strong indicators of success during the process of creating a calculator. And for me, the benefit of the calculator is as much in the process of developing one as it is in the end result itself. So a calculator is a fantastic way to get collaboration between different government departments, for example. And in Nigeria, I know there's been a kind of national steering committee created, which would be great to hear more from Iniobong. But it's also a great way of collaboration between government and other non-governmental stakeholders. So the kind of workshop process that goes on in order to define those levers and those level of ambition. So that collaboration for me is almost the best thing about one of these calculators, and it's also a prerequisite for a calculator to be successful.
Excellent. I mean, Nesmus, yeah, tell us a bit more. Or
Just to add to what Sam has been talking about, the collaboration nature that it brings, the discussions that the calculator generates during the process of its development is actually key. But this is not just key to the experts or the expert teams alone, but the whole sort of public engagement alongside it. That towards the launching phase, they are also able to chip in and help improve the tool as you go along.
Great, and Iniobong, it'd be great to hear from you, because also, you know, if this is going to work in the policy-making context, our ministers all have to be able to trust what's going on. So, you know, is this process working for you, and you know, and using it and bringing your ministers and the policy making along too?
Very much so. Like we saw in one of the slides where national stakeholders came around the table to provide inputs, discuss issues, and then we had a reports to ensure that we engage all relevant stakeholders in this process. We have the National Steering Committee, in which every ministry, department, and agency who would find this relevant in their work are on the steering committee. So they have their inputs in the development process, and therefore at the end of it, it's going to be user-friendly for all relevant stakeholders in their policy development and policy decision-making. Within the Federal Ministry of Environment and the within the ministry, we have what we call the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change, where we have every relevant ministry represented on the committee. So everyone has a stake in this, and therefore, in its final product, everyone will have a stake in its usage. And then you understand how the issues of climate changes, we have to have everyone across board to ensure that the strategies which we have developed for the NDCs will be effectively implemented. And we also have stakeholders who would also be part of ensuring that the data that we collect is providing the required demands of the UNFCCC that says we should have it in a TAC manner, in a transparent and an accurate and consistent manner. And this tool will ensure that for Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think you touch on there, we're seeing up here kind of, I guess the finished product in lots of ways, and it looks very smooth and lovely, but absolutely getting that robustness and transparency and consistency of data is hugely important so that we can all have confidence in this. And we all know that can be really challenging. And Esmus, it'd be great maybe, you can say a little bit actually about the challenges, because we know, it takes a long time, and I'm sure you've been through many hurdles and bumps to kind of get where you are. And I know, there's still a little bit to go.
Data can be quite a challenge. But for the case of Nigeria, as Madam Director has mentioned, we've got this wonderful steering committee that always supports the development of the calculator. And if there were any data needs, they are always at the far front to find a solution for it. The other thing is that we've got a fantastic team, the Nigerian core team, modeling team, that they have the ability to make a robust assumption based on what is available to them in order to provide the necessary input that needs to go into the calculator. Yes, it is a challenge, but it can also be an opportunity to reach out to other departments where probably they might be able to provide that level of support in terms of data provision that goes into the calculator. So we should also look at it as an opportunity rather than a challenge. Thanks, Kate.
Great. And Sam, I mean, we saw in the video earlier that, you're working with a whole range of very different countries as well. And we saw in the slides from Nigeria too, different contexts that we've talked about as well. And Rebekah mentioned, countries with different levels of energy access and therefore different, pathways to net zero too. I mean, maybe you could just say a bit about, what that looks like and that the challenges of making sure, this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a cookie cutter very clearly, but how do we make this work so it is really relevant in different countries and settings?
Yeah, and I think clearly that is essential for the calculators to be successful. Under the current international program, we're working with a kind of wide scope of countries. So we have Nigeria, Kenya, India, Vietnam, Thailand, Colombia. So countries with huge diversity, and each country has its own needs and requirements from the model. So actually, the initial phase of building a calculator is very much about the kind of in-country team kind of owning the development of the calculator, setting the objectives, understanding what the specific goals are that they want to achieve. Is it primarily about energy? Is it about energy and land use? Are there energy access issues? So you need to kind of do that scoping to understand what the calculator ultimately needs to be able to test. And then I think that the next stage, which is very much about kind of doing the hard work of engaging stakeholders and collating the data and the assumptions, that takes a long time. And that's because it has to be robust and suitable for each local context. And so I think that's where a successful project will have that strong kind of in-country buy-in and cross-government team, but also has that engagement. And I think if you do that together, you can make sure the calculator really does reflect each country's needs.
Excellent. And Rebekah, maybe it's a good time to come back to you as well. We've talked about some of, these challenges, and you mentioned how, it's a tool. And actually, the challenges then, I guess, are in the human element of interpreting and then making the best of it. Maybe you could just say a bit more, what are the limitations of this? But also, what are the advantages that this brings in terms of policymakers and governments and, I guess, just kind of general engagement in this as an issue?
Yeah, well, there's a really interesting conundrum at the heart of any prediction tool, which this is a prediction tool, right? And that is that predicting human behaviour is not independent of human behaviour. So you can, if you predict, if you predict physics, the physics doesn't know you're predicting it. Whereas if you're predicting what individuals or whole countries are going to do, that in itself affects the outcome. So I'm very interested to think about that, because where we're at with climate now is it's kind of, you almost need to throw all predictions out the window and think. And if you think about some of the changes that have happened over the past couple of decades, like the incredible rise of solar power and what that means both for decarbonisation and also energy access, modelling that, well, and no one got it right, and modelling what might be the next sort of solar, what might happen both in terms of technology and in terms of values and willingness amongst different populations and different voting publics to decarbonise. Again, that's a real challenge to model. So again, that's not to criticise attempts at prediction, but it's to say that we need a certain humility that we won't get it right, and that will sometimes be a lot harder than we anticipated, but also sometimes breakthroughs will come and it will be easier in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And my hope is that does happen, and that this amazing team who make the models then have to scurry back to their drawing boards and put different assumptions into the model. And as with the Paris ratchet process, that we sort of ratchet up what we know that we can achieve.
Absolutely. This is a live and evolving area and moving very fast, and moved quite fast over the last 2 weeks. And you mentioned breakthroughs as well, which we kind of launched right at the start. Day 2 of World Leaders Summit. It seems like a lifetime ago for some of us who've been here for 2 weeks, which is actually about looking at these sectors and trying to get big movements to make these technologies more accessible, more affordable, and that will then feed through into these models. So it's great. It says closing remarks. We've got a great audience here, and with my panel's kind of indulgence, maybe we'll see if we've got, 2 really quick questions from the audience. Hands. Okay, I've got 3 hands up. We'll take those. Please say who you are and where you come from, and try and keep your question nice and short. So, gentleman here, lady here, gentleman at the back. You might just have to shout, and I'll repeat the question. Great. Let's come over here.
I'm Montserrat from the Free University of Amsterdam. I'm currently starting my PhD I'm currently starting my PhD doing research on the SDGs, and specifically on how multi-stakeholder partnerships can achieve synergies between the SDGs. So obviously this calculator is very much climate change and emission reduction based, but I'm currently writing a piece on, say, like the trade-offs that can come with some solution pathways. So my question is for Mr. Frigens, or maybe also for Professor Willis. I would like to know if maybe looking ahead, you're considering including into the tool itself this type of trade-offs that can come. For example, a very clear one is with very ambitious technology solutions for climate change, biodiversity can be really compromised. But there are several examples across the board for every specific SDG, right? So that's what I'm interested in. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the last question at the back.
Thanks. Cheers. Thank you. Richard Randall Boggess from the University of Sheffield. This question is actually very similar to the previous one, but it's just wondering about, is there any scope for the models to be linked with other models, such as a model about GDP? So you can say, okay, if we make these sectors more ambitious, what's the impact of that on GDP? Or what's the impact going to be on, or linking it with a climate model? So what's the impact going to be on the occurrence of natural disasters if we reduce the emissions by X amount? Thank you.
Some great questions there, and I think you probably all heard the last two, and the first one was sort of about that community engagement, and saying a little bit more about that. Why don't we just come down the line, and you can kind of, starting with Sam, and you can kind of take which of those questions and the elements that you feel best to answer, and so community engagement, synergies and trade-offs and choices, and linking to other models.
I'll touch briefly on the co-benefits point. It's a really good question. You could say it's a limitation of the current model that it is primarily about climate, but it is also the beauty of the model in that it is simple and transparent and it doesn't overcomplicate things. But I think when we did some work in India a couple of years ago and we were scoping out the kind of new Indian calculator, there were certainly discussions then about whether we could expand it to include air quality benefits, for example. So I think that the model can be adapted potentially to try and capture some of those benefits, but I'm not aware of that actually having been implemented yet.
Go on, Rebekah.
Thanks. So Matthew, in terms of community engagement and community energy, I think that's a really interesting example where people tend to say, "Oh, which technology should we choose from? Shall we have wind or solar or nuclear or whatever?" And actually, quite often when you talk to people, and this is my research talking to people, it's not so much. They're kind of happy with most technologies as a rule. Some not, but most technologies, especially renewables, have a high level of support. But the questions are around who owns them, who controls them, who profits from them. And so, when you're talking not about the pathways, but about the policies, I absolutely think that you need to think as much about those questions, the kind of atmosphere of the technologies, as well as the actual, technology nuts and bolts. And that community energy is a really good example, I think, of an energy policy that does engage and motivate and provides that sort of virtuous circle of engagement around climate. And in a way, that takes me on to the points about what you might call co-benefits or disbenefits between different policy goals, because I'm a social scientist. I love complexity. I want everything in this model, and I do think actually that that people's values, political power, where who basically motivations and so on, those things aren't included in models, and I find that problematic. Also, as you say, the links between health, well-being, biodiversity, and so on. So, I haven't got an answer to this, but that is the eternal conundrum. Like, do you throw everything in which case you end up with a model of absolutely everything with, I don't know, what's your total number of levers you could go up to? I mean, or do you actually, and I think this is what it comes down to, do you use quite a simple tool and then encourage that wider conversation about, about what it doesn't include and about the implications of that. That's probably a cop-out, but that's kind of the accommodation I've come to.
Great. Inia Bong, do you want to say something, I guess, about any of those, but maybe the real community engagement point as well?
Yeah, just to add to the community and mention that the different types of communities, and I want to talk on the organized community. For us, during the national engagement, we had organized private sectors under an umbrella like the manufacturers organization. We had different sectoral organizations under different umbrellas, and they all had different issues as this affects them, and they brought to table what they want and how they want it to be. And this model really gives a whole lot in terms of co-benefits, projections, and that is what we see at a point. And I want to really appreciate what you mentioned earlier on, saying that the first one, and then this is an improvement of the first UK calculator that was made. This is national. It takes cognizance of national circumstances, and it's nationally owned, and each department owns it. And that gives it that kind of ownership that the calculator requires to deliver on the mandate of each unique mandate of a government, each unique mandate of each organized community. And therefore, at the end of the day, we see a goal that is achieved nationally. And that's what the projection provides from this model. Thank you.
Excellent. And Esmus, do you want to bring anything, maybe about how we use the data and linking to other models? I mean, complex questions to answer in a minute.
Yeah. So in the underlying belly of the Excel model, as what you saw, there are different levels of it. There are costs there, capex and opex, that are included. We haven't actually thought about linking the models with other models, but I think it can be a possibility to do that. We attempted to do that with other tools, like when we were developing the European calculator. I think Jan will concur there. But we haven't actually attempted to do this under the 2050 calculator program. Thank you. And I'm from Sheffield, by the way.
It's great. A huge thank you to the panel. And I hope you've found this useful and inspiring. And I think what for me is that, this is something really tangible and useful and practical that's making a real difference. We all know we've got a huge job ahead of us, and we all need all the tools that we can get to get us there. And what I think is exciting is, this brings together the people and the engagement and those elements that we've talked about, which are absolutely essential to the challenge ahead, and that partnership and that collaboration that absolutely has to happen. But it also talks to the elements which are critical, to the sort of UNFCCC journey too, about transparency and this being nationally owned, as you were just saying, which is absolutely critical, because we've all got our own journeys and they're all different, but we all know we have to get to this destination as well. And this is something which is absolutely transparent and inclusive. And I hope you feel a bit inspired from all of that. And I think maybe we've got one last slide, which, look at this, the power of technology. You can kind of follow this. This will take you, I think, to the Mackay carbon calculator, which was mentioned earlier. And, do go and Google it as well. And have a play with it, because that's what this is all about. And yeah, we're really excited for what's been happening. Thank you very much to the panel and for all the work in Nigeria. And, we're excited to see this expand into other countries as well. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you to my panel.